right, good morning, everyone. I think we're all up and running here. You can hear me? All right, seems like every week we come here to see new faces or those who have been with us for a while. So just by way of review again, real quick, we're looking at the history of the church, starting last year with, we went all the way back to the Old Testament, and we were looking at Old Testament foreshadows of the church and showing how the church was a part of God's plan from eternity past. And we've worked our way up through looking at, we're spending most of our time in Daniel right now, looking at the prophecies in Daniel and how they relate to the Gentile kingdoms that will have dominion over Jerusalem and Judah from the time that Israel falls to the Babylonian captivity until the time that Christ comes, and showing how that these events prepare the world for the coming of Christ and for his church. Right now, we are now at that phase of time when we've had the Babylonian Empire come and fall, we've had the Persian Empire come and fall, and now we are with the Greek Empire, or the Hellenistic Empire. The Greek Empire originally began with the conquest of Alexander the Great. He lived for only 6 years after he brought down the Persian Empire. Then his empire breaks up into 4 smaller empires after several decades of conquest, or of warfare and conflict between his generals as they jockey for position and for dominance. So we're looking right now at this period, the Hellenistic period, where Alexander is off the scene. The Greek Empire is now breaking up into smaller constituent empires. These smaller empires still are fundamentally Greek in nature, although they do not have the same strength and power that they had under Alexander. And we're focusing right now on the effect of Hellenism on Israel and the Jews and how it affected the Jewish state of mind, and really begins to set the stage for a lot of what we are going to read in the New Testament as Christ deals with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the various political elements that are in Jewish society at the time, and then the apostles, how they deal with the various Greek philosophies that had infected the Jewish mindset and really affected the way that they saw the world. So, I think this is where we left off last time. We were looking at how Jewish society had split into 2 factions by this period. We're in the 3rd century BC, which is about the 200s, from the time that Alexander has died, and we're now in the 200s BC. Jewish society had split into 2 basic factions. There were the Hellenizers, those who enthusiastically embraced the Hellenistic Greek culture. And then there were the Judaizers, who were the more traditional, who tried to hold on to Jewish tradition and maintain Jewish tradition. As I read history, the Judaizers seem to have been in the definite minority. The vast majority of the Greeks went wholeheartedly whole hog and just fell in line with the Greek culture and adopted a lot of Greek practices, and they just readily embraced the Greek view of the world, which doesn't include clickers that work. I guess it helps if I turn it on. There we go. All right. So many, if not most, of the Jews enthusiastically embraced the Greek culture, and we'll look a little bit more at how this manifested itself. Those resisting the Greek culture appear to have been in the minority, at least for a period of time. Following the death of Alexander, Israel came first under the dominion of the Ptolemaic Empire. One of the Greek generals that stepped up to take part of Alexander's empire was the Greek general Ptolemy. And his empire basically consisted of Egypt, most of Palestine, and maybe even somewhat northward into Syria at first. So Judah is initially under the dominion of the Ptolemaic Empire, whose capital was Alexandria. Alexandria still exists today as one of the major Egyptian cities. The relations between the Ptolemaic Empire and the Jews were generally good. The Ptolemaic Empire was considerate of Jewish tradition, Jewish law, and as long as the Jews maintained the peace, paid their taxes, maintained loyalty to the Ptolemaic Empire, they were allowed a certain degree of self-autonomy. They could govern themselves as long as they did not become rebellious. They were allowed to practice their own cultural and religious affairs, like I said, so long as they paid their taxes and kept the peace. As an effort to spread and ingrain Greek culture into the newly conquered territories, many of these generals sought to set up large cities to become focal points for Greek culture as they spread, or as they pushed it forth. Ptolemy sought to establish Alexandria as a rival city to Athens, and he encouraged Jews to move to Alexandria. So it's estimated that at the time of the establishment of the Ptolemaic Empire, there were as many as 300,000 Jews living at Alexandria. And by the time of the Romans, that number is thought to have grown to about 1 million. So there is a substantial number of Jews living in Ptolemaic Egypt. And as a result, the Jews are gradually giving up their native Aramaic in favor of Greek, especially the Jews who lived in Alexandria. They began to speak Greek. Greek was their mother tongue, so to speak, for much of their while they were there. It was during the 2nd century BC that the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek, known as the Septuagint. So if you're reading your Bible and you come across any of the marginal notes or footnotes, and you see the little reference there, LXX, that means that they're making some reference to the Septuagint in their analysis of a particular passage of Scripture. Now, the tradition of the Septuagint was that Ptolemy, because so many Jews no longer spoke Hebrew but Greek, he authorized a translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. According to tradition, there were 72 translators, 12 from each of the 12 tribes. They were told to go into separate rooms all by themselves and translate. And according to tradition, when they were done translating, all the translations were exactly the same. This is Jewish Talmud tradition. I don't know whether it has any validity to it or not, but that is the tradition, and that's the story that's most often told. And he also wanted to take the Old Testament, translate it into Greek, and add it to the big library that he had established in Alexandria. As mentioned, he wanted Alexandria to become a rival to Athens and to become a cultural focal point for Greek culture. And then we'll look at these guys later on, but two Jews who were fundamental in promoting Hellenism were Philo Judaeus and Flavius Josephus. Josephus, you'll probably find his works in the libraries of many of your pastors. It's a good historical reference for what was going on at the time of Christ. Philo, he preceded Christ by about 200 years. He was responsible for, it's interesting, Pastor, you talked about over-allegorizing of the Scriptures a couple Wednesday nights ago, and that's the very thing I was studying here. Philo, he took Greek philosophy and used it to over-allegorize the Old Testament. And based on his over-allegorization of the Old Testament, many of the Pharisaic traditions that overshadowed the original intent and meaning of the Old Testament took hold, so that when Christ is berating the Pharisees and the Sadducees for their traditions have root in a lot of the philosophical interpretations of Philo as he applied Greek philosophy to the Old Testament. Here we go. All right, now let's just, we'll recap here the Greek culture. First of all, we looked at philosophy and how the various strains of philosophy had embedded themselves into Greek thinking and had become part of the Hellenistic culture throughout the conquered areas. Also, part of Greek culture was the polis, or the city-state. The Greeks set up their empire so that states were fundamentally autonomous. Again, as long as they were loyal to the mother country, paid their taxes, they were allowed to govern themselves autonomously. They had their own sets of rules, their own religions. Every city would have its own god or goddess that was prominent in their city. They also, the theater was another way for Greek culture to be exported. Archaeologists have found the archaeological ruins of theaters all over the Middle East. every city had a theater of some size where these Greek plays were put on, and they were used really to promote Greek political thought, Greek philosophy, Greek view of life. And the Jews enjoyed going to these things. They became really a part of the culture. And you would probably find a vast number of Jews sitting in the theater at any given time. There was the gymnasium. The gymnasium was established all over the Middle East as well. The gymnasium at first was a place where men would go to train for participation in the Olympic Games. The gymnasium eventually became a place where it was like a social gathering where guys would get together, they would train, they would philosophize, they would talk, and they would sodomize as well. It was a place of sin. Higher education. The Greeks valued higher education, and the Jews, if they wanted to be a part of the Greek culture, they would submit to Greek education, and again, they would be infected and affected by Greek culture. Libraries, they spread libraries all over the place where they gathered all the works they could into one place. Language. The Greek became the dominant language in the ancient world. And in Revelation 23:13, it says, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Alpha is the first letter, Omega the last. So even Christ himself addresses the 7 churches in the Greek language. And then religion. The Greeks, of course, they were polytheistic. They made their gods in the image of man rather than the Jews. As the Old Testament tells us, God made man in his image. So it was probably pretty easy to be a religious Greek because you had to be no better than your vile gods that you worship. Because the gods were hedonistic, they were temperamental, they were every bit as wicked as men were. So it was pretty easy to be a Greek. You just had to be no better than the vile gods that you worshipped. All you had to do was to pay homage to them so they wouldn't take their wrath out on you. That was basically their philosophy. Paul, he came into contact with the polytheistic Greek religion. Acts 17:22-23. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. I don't have any idea how many inscriptions they would have had here, but they must have been plenty. And then the Greeks, being the superstitious religious people they logically assumed there must be some gods here we have forgotten about, so we better make them happy as well. Acts 19:24, For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen. And then same chapter, verses 27-28, and when they heard these things, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worshipeth. And when they heard these sayings, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. Now, this little quote from Maccabees. Maccabees is not inspired scripture. I'm not claiming that it is. I'm not at all saying that it is. But 1st and 2nd Maccabees are useful historical documents because they give you a glimpse into what is happening in Judea during the time that the Greeks have control over Jerusalem. So, in 1 Maccabees 1:11-15, it states here that in those days certain renegades from Israel, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. This proposal pleased them, and some of them eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to Gentile custom, and removed the marks of circumcision and abandoned the Holy Covenant. They joined the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. So if you take what this is saying, is that the Jews, the Greeks worshipped the human body, so that when men participated in the Olympic Games, they did so in the nude. When they went to the gymnasium to practice and to train, they did so in the nude. So for the average Jew, if they wanted to participate in Greek culture in this way, it would be obvious that they were not Greek due to the ordinance of circumcision. So in order to overcome this and to fulfill their desire to participate in these things, they would endure certain painful surgeries to undo the circumcision. And this is what he's getting at here, is that they wanted to remove the marks of circumcision so that they could participate in these games in the nude, which was contrary to Old Testament law. The Old Testament was very specific about nakedness, and the Jews, contrary to what they've been taught from the Old Testament, they were willing to set that aside so they could participate in this aspect of Greek culture. And from what I've heard, this type of surgery was very, very painful, and often would result in the person receiving it as not being able to have children again. So this is the extent to which Greek culture had influenced the Jewish people at the time. So now let's go back. I want to do some timeline here real quick. What I'm trying to do here with my timeline now is I'm going to try to juxtapose what's happening in Rome, what's happening in the Greek Empire, and how it's affecting Israel. 753, Rome is, by tradition is founded. And if we go back to Daniel, you'll see the image, the legs of iron and the terrible beast. These both represent Rome, the fourth empire that would arise after the Greek Empire passes from the scene. So it's even before Israel is carried off into Babylonian captivity, the wheels are already turning for the fourth empire to step onto the scene. So Judah goes into captivity, into Babylonian captivity in two phases in 597 BC, 586 BC. And then in 538 BC, Cyrus the Persian conquers the Babylonian Empire, and one of his early laws, one of his early decrees was to allow the Jews freedom to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. In 509 BC, Rome becomes a republic. Rome is beginning to gain power. 338 BC, Rome gains control of central Italy. And this is just a few years before Alexander begins his Persian invasion. In 333, Alexander defeats Darius at Gaugamela, ending the Persian Empire after 2 years. And then Alexander dies in 323 BC, and then a struggle for the post-Alexandrian Empire begins. Let's go back a little bit. Israel initially became part of the Ptolemaic Empire after the death of Alexander. There were several decades worth of struggle and conflict over the carcass of the Greek Empire. When all was said and done, it really came down to four basic empires. First, we had the Greeks in Macedonia. The general that took control there was a guy named Cassander. Then we have Thrace in Western Asia Minor, Lysimachus. Over here, Seleucus, he took control of the Eastern Asian Empire. He's referred to in Daniel 11, 8 through 35 as the king of the north. And we're going to look at that specifically. And then Ptolemy, king of the south, also mentioned in Daniel 11, 8 to 35. So, when we're talking king of the north and king of the south, the reference point is Jerusalem or Israel. So Israel is our directional reference point. The king of the north is going to be the Seleucid Empire, also referred to in Scripture as the king of Syria. And the king of the south will be the Ptolemaic Empire, also referred to as the king of the south. So again, Jerusalem is your reference point. Whether you're the king of the north, king of the south, it's as you're standing in the streets of Jerusalem. So for the next 200 years, the king of the south and the king of the north will war against each other for about 200 years, with each marching back and forth through Israel. So from this point forward, the other two that we mentioned, they don't matter. They're not mentioned. They're not a part of, they really have no part in dominion over Israel. It is the Seleucid Empire to the east and the Ptolemaic Empire to the south. They're the only two now that Daniel 11 really is referring to as having dominion over Israel. So, why don't we go into Daniel 11, and I'm going to go verse by verse or section by section, and we're going to show how, as we go through this, the prophecies and how they are specifically fulfilled during this period of time. So we'll start first with Daniel 11:5. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. So, Daniel 11:5. This covers a time period of about 316 to 311 BC. Seleucus. I mentioned the four major kings who took parts of Alexander's empire. There was a fifth guy of lesser note who tried to usurp and take his share of the kingdom by the name of Antigonus. And he put great pressure on Seleucus, and he fled to Ptolemy for protection. So, 316 BC, Seleucus flees to Egypt and joins Ptolemy under pressure from Antigonus, who attempted to subvert his power. And this is referred to in Daniel 11:5 as one of his princes. 312 BC, Ptolemy defeats Antigonus in a battle at Gaza, and that allows Seleucus to return to Babylon in 311 BC and set up his kingdom. He strengthens his kingdom and begins to expand it to the east, so that he does have a great dominion as prophesied in Daniel 11:5. So the prophecies of Daniel 11:5, as they were fulfilled first, the king of the south, Ptolemy, along with one of his princes, Seleucus, would go strong. The prince of the king of the north, Seleucus, would gain ascendancy over the king of the south. The Seleucid kingdom would include most of Eastern Asia Minor, and would reach as far as India to the Indus River, so that his empire is expanded under his kingship. And then Seleucus would eventually become more powerful, and his kingdom would be larger than that of Ptolemy, which historically you could see. That one map you showed that the Ptolemaic Empire is considerably smaller than the Seleucid Empire. So Seleucus conquers Babylon, founds the Seleucid dynasty in 312 BC. He is the king of the north in Daniel 11. Now, during this period of time, we have Rome has subdued. When we talked a little bit about the Greek colonization of the Mediterranean area due to their topography and the nature of their land, the Greeks were forced to colonize in order to feed themselves because they did not have a lot of farmable land. And one of the areas that was colonized was southern Italy. So southern Italy consisted at that time of a lot of Greek city-states that had sprung up around the Mediterranean. And now Rome is rising in power, and Rome has conquered these city-states during the Pyrrhic Wars, and as a result, in 270 BC, Rome now has control of all of Italy. So Rome is continuing to increase in power. 364, we have the Punic Wars. Rome battles Carthage for supremacy over the western Mediterranean. Daniel 11:6. We have another reference in Daniel. Let's look at that one here real quick. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but he shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So, Ptolemy II and Antiochus II, they agreed to a peace treaty in 250 BC. So they're going to join themselves together according to the prophecy. Part of this joining required that Antiochus divorce his wife, Laodice, and to marry Ptolemy's daughter, Bernice. So they joined themselves together. Ptolemy dies after 4 years. Antiochus doesn't really like his new wife. He decides to divorce her and to remarry his original wife. Of course, when you divorce the first wife the first time, she gets pretty mad, and they don't let bygones be bygones. She takes it out on him, and she poisons Antiochus II and then murders Bernice and all those who came to Egypt with her. So she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So we see again that known historical fact is matching up with the prophecies in this chapter. So the prophecies of Daniel 11:6. There would be an alliance between the kings of the north and the south. The daughter of the king of the south, would be part of this alliance. The daughter's father, Ptolemy II, would die. Then she would die, and those who came with and supported her. Now, when Ptolemy II dies, his son, Ptolemy III, becomes the king of Egypt. Now, he was the brother of Bernice, who was murdered by Laodice. Now, he is enraged over what has happened to his teenage sister, and he decides he's going to take vengeance. So we see in Daniel 11, 7 to 8. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, and with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So, Ptolemy III is the brother of Bernice. So it says, out of the branch of her root shall one stand up in his estate. Ptolemy II, I should say Ptolemy III. Ptolemy III and his army advanced as far as the Tigris River to avenge Bernice's death. And the prophecy here is shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them. And then the first wife of the king of the north is killed as retribution for her murder of Ptolemy III's sister. And we see here, and prevail. And Ptolemy, when he goes back to Egypt, he plunders the treasures of the king of the north. And this is the tally of what history says he took with him. And the prophecy is that he would carry captives their gods and precious vessels of silver and gold. So the fulfilled prophecies here, Ptolemy III, Bernice's brother, becomes the new pharaoh of Egypt. Out of anger, he launches a military campaign against the Seleucid Empire to avenge her murder. The wealth of the Seleucid Empire is plundered and taken back to Egypt. Let's go back again. So again, what we're seeing here in the struggle between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, Israel is in the pathway all the time. They're back and forth through Israel in their wars, and Israel is sort of caught up in the middle. And sometimes she chooses sides, much to her cost. 241, Carthage sues for peace, ending the First Punic War. Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica are annexed as part of Rome's first overseas empire. So this is the first time that Rome has expanded her empire overseas. So again, Rome is rising in power. Rome is on the western horizon, and eventually she's going to be strong enough to begin to interfere in these kingdoms of the east. Okay, Seleucus II goes to war against Ptolemy III to avenge his kingdom's humiliation. And we see that in Daniel 11, 9 to 10. So the king of the north, king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up, and they shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Let's see here. Let's move ahead here. So Seleucus II attempts to repay Ptolemy III for his humiliating defeat. The fortress is a reference to the Egyptian fortress Raphia. It is right on the border between Sinai and Israel. It's like the outer frontier of the Egyptian empire. And I believe this is the fortress that they're referencing here. Seleucus II attempts to repay Ptolemy for his humiliating defeat, but he returns without success in 240. Seleucus II dies. His son, Seleucus III, takes his throne, but he does not live long enough to see anything done. He dies, and then his other son, Antiochus III, he becomes king, and he is the one that will take over in an effort to avenge the kingdom's humiliating defeat at the hands of Ptolemy III. So it says here, but his sons shall be stirred up. These are the sons of Seleucus II. Ptolemy III dies in 221 BC. Antiochus brings a great army, 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 102 elephants, and the scripture tells us that he shall assemble a multitude of great force, then shall he return even to his fortress. So he drives the Ptolemies out, he takes the fortress, and Israel is now under the dominion of the Seleucids, because he has driven the Egyptians back and has taken their easternmost fortress city. So, fulfilled prophecies here. Seleucus II had two sons. Seleucus III, Antiochus III. Seleucus III dies 4 years after ascending the throne, and he is succeeded by his brother. Only one of the sons, Antiochus III, would come against the king of the south. Antiochus III would come with a great force. Antiochus III would drive through to the Egyptian fortress of Rafah, capturing it and taking control of Israel. So, I see, I haven't heard the bell yet, but it looks like we're at 20 after. Are there any questions or comments so far on what we've discussed here? Any disagreements? Agreements? Anything? All right, then. I think I'm going to stop here. We'll continue on next week. I think this is a good place to stop. So, thank you, folks.